Sophia sat opposite Bruce at their worn oak dining table, her face pale under the overhead light. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coffee mug, eyes darting between his face and the tabletop, as though seeking the courage to begin. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice a quivering whisper. Bruce looked up from his plate. Mid-bite, the easy comfort of the evening instantly thickened with unease. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sophia took a breath, each second dragging as though the weight of her next words pressed down on time itself. 3 months ago, I slept with someone else." The word struck like a thunderclap. Bruce froze, fork halfway to his mouth, his brain scrambling to process the syllables. For a moment, he wondered if he'd misheard. "What did you just say?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. "It was a mistake. It was stupid and I hate myself for it." "Who?" Bruce demanded, his voice sharper now, every muscle in his body taut. "Will," she said after a long pause, her voice breaking on the name. Bruce leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving as though all the air had been knocked out of him. "Will? Your colleague Will?" Sophia nodded miserably. The name felt like poison on her tongue. Bruce's face contorted in disbelief, a mixture of anger, pain, and humiliation washing over him. "At a party? What the hell, Sophia? How could you do this to us?" His voice cracked with emotion, each question hitting her like a lash. "I was lonely," Sophia said through her tears. "You've been so distant, Bruce. Always working late, always distracted. I felt invisible. He was just there. He noticed me. She stopped herself, as though the words themselves were too damning to speak. Bruce stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "So that's it? I didn't give you enough attention, so you decided to destroy our marriage?" His voice was loud now, echoing through the room. "I didn't mean to destroy anything." Sophia shouted back, her tone defensive now. "I was desperate, Bruce. I felt like I didn't exist to you anymore." "That's such a convenient excuse," Bruce spat. "And Will? How long has he been waiting for you to feel lonely?" "Was this the first time?" "Yes," Sophia said emphatically. "It was one night. One terrible, stupid night." Bruce ran his hands through his hair, pacing the room, his mind racing. "And you decided 3 months later was the right time to tell me? Was it eating away at you, or did you think you could just hide it forever?" Sophia lowered her head, shame rippling through her. "I couldn't hold it in anymore," she admitted. "I couldn't lie to you." Bruce slammed his fist against the table, making her jump. "Lie to me? You already did, Sophia. Every single day since that night, you've been lying to me." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry?" Bruce laughed bitterly. "Sorry doesn't erase this, Sophia. Sorry doesn't make me unsee the image of you and him." Sophia wiped her face with trembling hands. "I didn't want to hurt you, Bruce. I swear." "Well, congratulations," Bruce said coldly. "You've succeeded in ways I didn't think were possible." The room fell silent, the air heavy with unsaid words and unrelenting tension. Sophia watched as Bruce retreated to the other side of the room, his back to her. She could see his shoulders rising and falling, his breath ragged. "How am I supposed to face him at work?" Bruce finally said, his voice quieter now, tinged with despair. "Do you know what you've done to me? To us?" Sophia stood, taking a tentative step toward him. "I don't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever," she said. "But I had to tell you because I couldn't keep living this lie. I love you, Bruce. I want to fix this. I want us to be okay." Bruce turned to face her, his eyes red, his jaw clenched. "You want us to be okay?" he repeated, incredulous. "Do you think it's that simple? You don't just break something like this and glue it back together overnight." "I know," Sophia whispered. "But I want to try." Bruce stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving Sophia standing alone in the oppressive silence of their shattered world. Bruce sat across from Sophia in the cramped office of the marriage therapist, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The tension between them was palpable, so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Sophia sat hunched over, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. The therapist, a calm woman in her 40s with a practiced air of neutrality, tried to break the silence. "Bruce, why don't we start by talking about how you're feeling?" she asked gently. "How I'm feeling?" Bruce snapped, his voice bitter. "I'm feeling like I'm sitting in a room with someone I don't even know anymore." Sophia flinched as though she'd been slapped, her eyes darting to the therapist for reassurance. "This is exactly what we're here to work through," the therapist said, her voice steady. "Trust takes time to rebuild, but it's not impossible." Bruce let out a sharp laugh. "Rebuild? How do you rebuild something that's been completely obliterated?" Sophia's voice wavered as she tried to interject. "I know I hurt you, Bruce. But I've been honest about everything since that night. I'm trying." "Trying?" Bruce repeated, his eyes narrowing. "You're trying now, sure. But what about back then? When you were sneaking around, letting another man touch you?" His voice rose with each word, the bitterness cutting deeper. Sophia's cheeks burned with humiliation. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "It was a mistake. One night." "One night is all it takes to destroy everything," Bruce interrupted, his tone venomous. "And let's not pretend you've been honest. 3 months, Sophia. You hid it for 3 months. If it hadn't been eating you alive, would you have ever told me?" Sophia's silence was answer enough. The sessions continued for weeks, each one more fraught than the last. Bruce found no solace in therapy. Instead, his suspicion grew, feeding off the remnants of trust that had once formed the foundation of their marriage. He began watching Sophia closely, every interaction scrutinized, every word dissected. At first, it was subtle, an extra glance at her phone when she left it unattended, a pointed question about her day at work. But soon it escalated. One night, Sophia came home to find Bruce rifling through her purse. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic lacing her voice. Bruce didn't look up. "Checking." "Checking for what?" she demanded, stepping closer, her voice trembling. "For anything that proves you're lying to me again," he said flatly, finally meeting her gaze. His expression was cold, unreadable. Sophia felt her heart sink. "I'm not lying to you, Bruce." He let out a derisive snort. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe." The atmosphere in their home became suffocating. Bruce started calling her during the day, demanding video calls to see where she was and who she was with. He monitored her social media accounts, even going so far as to install a tracking app on her phone without her knowledge. When Sophia discovered it, she confronted him, her voice breaking with anger and despair. "Do you seriously not trust me at all?" she cried. Bruce's face was a mask of indifference. "Should I?" The final blow came one evening when Bruce broached a subject that made Sophia's blood run cold. They were in the kitchen, the air heavy with unspoken tension as Sophia cooked dinner. "I want a DNA test for Emily," Bruce said suddenly, his tone casual, as though he were asking for a weather update. Sophia froze, the knife in her hand slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the counter. "What?" she whispered, turning to face him. "You heard me," Bruce said, his gaze fixed on her. "I want a DNA test. I need to know if Emily is really mine." Sophia's mouth opened and closed, her mind struggling to comprehend his words. "Emily is your daughter," she said finally, her voice trembling. "How could you even think?" Bruce cut her off. "Because I don't know what to think anymore, Sophia. You've lied to me before. How do I know you didn't lie about this too?" Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. "How can you say that? She's your child. Look at her." Bruce's face remained impassive. "That's not enough for me anymore." The humiliation was crushing. Sophia had to endure the process of taking Emily to the clinic, her heart breaking with every swab and every form she had to fill out. The waiting period for the results was agonizing. Bruce remained cold and distant, barely speaking to her unless it was to issue some new demand or accusation. When the results finally came, proving that Emily was indeed Bruce's daughter, Sophia had hoped it would bring some relief, some small step toward healing. But Bruce's reaction was far from what she had expected. "Well," he said flatly, tossing the envelope onto the table. I guess you were telling the truth about that, at least. At least? Sophia echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. What more do you want from me, Bruce? I've done everything you've asked. I've begged for your forgiveness. I've put up with your suspicion, your jealousy, your constant surveillance. What else can I do? Bruce stared at her, his expression unreadable. I don't know, he admitted. But it's not enough. None of it feels like enough. That night, Sophia lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as tears streamed silently down her face. Bruce slept beside her, his back turned, the space between them a chasm of broken trust and unspoken words. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the rift between them only deepened. Sophia felt like a prisoner in her own home, constantly walking on eggshells, constantly trying to prove her loyalty to a man who seemed determined to believe the worst of her. And Bruce, consumed by his own pain and betrayal, could not bring himself to lower the walls he had built around his heart. Their marriage, once a fortress of love and trust, now lay in ruins, a hollow shell of what it had once been, filled with suspicion, bitterness, and the lingering echoes of betrayal. The living room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning, a deceptive calm that belied the storm brewing within. Bruce stood in front of the fireplace, his back to Sophia. He stared at the framed photos on the mantel, snapshots of a family that had once been whole. Sophia sat on the edge of the couch, her hands gripping her knees, her face pale. I can't do this anymore, Sophia, Bruce said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. Bruce, no. Please don't say that. He turned to face her, his expression devoid of the warmth it once held. I've said it before. I've thought about it 100 times since you told me what you did. But now I know. It's over. No. Sophia cried, standing abruptly, her voice trembling. We can fix this. We can go to more therapy. I'll do whatever it takes, Bruce. Just don't give up on us. Bruce shook his head slowly, the anguish in his eyes belying the coldness of his words. This isn't something you can patch up with therapy. I can't even look at you without feeling disgusted. Every time I think about what you did, it's like a knife in my chest. And I can't live like this anymore. It's killing me. Sophia's legs gave out, and she collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. I love you, she choked out. I love you, Bruce. Maybe you do, Bruce said, his tone harsh. But you didn't love me enough to stay faithful, did you? The words hit Sophia like a slap, and her sobs grew louder, filling the room with raw, unfiltered pain. Bruce didn't move to comfort her. He couldn't. He felt like a hollow man, drained of all emotion except a simmering anger and a relentless sadness. The next morning, Bruce sat at the kitchen table with Emily and Josh, their 2 children. Emily, just 6, swung her legs under the chair, blissfully unaware of the heaviness in the room. Josh, at 10, was more perceptive. He watched his father with wide, worried eyes. Sophia stood by the counter, clutching a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She avoided Bruce's gaze, her face blotchy and pale from the night's crying. Bruce cleared his throat, his heart pounding. He had practiced this moment in his head, but the reality was far worse. Kids, there's something we need to talk about. Emily looked up from her cereal, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. What is it, Daddy? Bruce forced a small smile, though it felt like his face might crack under the strain. Mommy and we've decided it's best if we don't live together anymore. Josh's face fell. What do you mean? Bruce took a deep breath. It means that we're going to get a divorce. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Emily's brow furrowed, her young mind struggling to grasp the concept. What's a divorce? It means, Bruce said carefully, his voice cracking, that Mommy and I won't be married anymore. But we both love you very much, and nothing will ever change that. Josh's eyes filled with tears. But is it because of the fighting? Sophia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. No, honey. It's not your fault. It's something between Daddy and me. Did you do something bad, Mommy? Emily asked innocently, her big eyes locking onto Sophia. Sophia flinched as though struck, and Bruce closed his eyes, pain lancing through him. "Emily, this isn't about blame," he said firmly. "Sometimes grown-ups just can't make things work, no matter how hard they try." "But we're a family," Josh said, his voice breaking. "Families are supposed to stay together." "I know, buddy," Bruce said, his own eyes welling with tears. "I know. But sometimes, staying together hurts more than being apart." Emily began to cry, her small sobs tearing through the room. Sophia rushed to her side, pulling her into a hug, her own tears falling freely. Josh stared at Bruce, his young face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "You're breaking up our family," Josh said, his voice trembling. Bruce felt like the worst kind of monster. "I'm doing this because I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you and your sister to grow up in a home where there's no fighting, no tension. That's what you deserve." Josh didn't respond. He shoved his chair back and stormed out of the room, leaving Bruce and Sophia sitting in the wreckage of their broken family. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, custody agreements, and endless tears. Bruce moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, leaving behind the house he had worked so hard to build, the home that now felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. Sophia begged him to reconsider, her pleas growing more desperate as the divorce papers were finalized. "Think about the kids," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "They need us both." "They'll have us both," Bruce said, his tone clipped. "Just not together." Sophia reached out, grabbing his arm. "I love you, Bruce. Please don't do this." Bruce pulled away, his face hard. "You should have thought about that before you slept with him." Her shoulders sagged, and she watched in silence as he walked out the door, taking the last of his belongings with him. The first time Bruce picked up the kids for the weekend, Emily clung to his leg, crying that she didn't want to leave Mommy. Josh, on the other hand, barely spoke to him, his hurt manifesting as icy silence. Bruce tried to make their time together special: movies, ice cream, trips to the park, but no amount of fun could erase the sadness in their eyes. He lay awake at night in his small, unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he had done the right thing. The guilt gnawed at him, but so did the anger. Every time he thought about Sophia and Will, the image of them together burned in his mind like a brand. He couldn't forgive her. He couldn't forget. Months later, Bruce saw Sophia at one of Josh's soccer games. She looked thinner, her face drawn and tired. She waved at him tentatively, but he turned away, pretending not to see her. The humiliation still stung too deeply. She had shattered his trust, his pride, his very sense of self. As he sat on the bleachers, cheering for Josh, Bruce realized that the pain might never fully go away. But he also knew that he couldn't let it define him. His children needed him, stable, strong, and whole. And so, he decided to focus on them, to rebuild his life piece by piece, even if the scars of Sophia's betrayal would always remain. Bruce had thought the worst was over. The divorce was messy, the children were struggling, and the wounds Sophia had inflicted on his heart seemed permanent. But at least there had been closure, a line drawn under their fractured marriage. Or so he believed. It started with an innocent observation from his sister, Karen, during one of their rare family dinners. She had glanced at Emily, Lily, as they often called her lovingly, then back at Bruce. "She's adorable," Karen had said, her voice warm. "But it's funny, she doesn't really look like you, does she?" Bruce had shrugged it off at the time, brushing her comment aside. "She takes after Sophia?" he'd said, the familiar bitterness slipping into his voice. But the thought lingered, festering in the back of his mind like a splinter. It wasn't just Karen's comment. Over the years, he had noticed subtle differences too. Lily's hair was lighter, her eyes a shade of green that neither he nor Sophia possessed. He had always dismissed it, unwilling to entertain the dark thoughts that sometimes crept into his mind. Until now. The DNA test was Bruce's idea, born of a mix of curiosity and the gnawing distrust that Sophia's betrayal had planted in him. He justified it to himself as necessary, a step to put his lingering doubts to rest. If nothing else, it would be definitive proof of his connection to Lily, something no one could ever take away. Sophia had been defensive when he brought it up. "You're kidding, right?" she had said, her voice rising in disbelief. "After everything, now you want a DNA test?" She's your daughter, Bruce. I just want to be sure, Bruce had replied, his voice cold, detached. After what you did, I have every right to ask. Sophia had looked at him like he'd slapped her, but she agreed, though not without a fight. This is humiliating, she muttered as they drove to the clinic. For all of us. Bruce said nothing, staring out the window, his jaw clenched. The results arrived 2 weeks later, an unassuming envelope that felt heavier than it had any right to be. Bruce opened it alone in his apartment, his hands trembling as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the clinical language, the percentages and probabilities, his heart pounding in his chest. The words hit him like a freight train. Probability of paternity, 0%. He sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the paper, his mind unable to process what he was reading. Lily wasn't his. She had never been his. The one bright spot in his shattered life, the one thing he had clung to, was gone in an instant. The confrontation was inevitable. Bruce waited until Sophia came to pick up the kids for her weekend with them. He pulled her aside as Josh and Lily played in the other room, his voice low but shaking with rage. I got the results, he said, holding up the envelope. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Sophia froze, her eyes darting to the envelope in his hand. Bruce. She's not mine, he hissed, cutting her off. Lily. She's Will's, isn't she? Sophia's face crumpled, her hand flying to her mouth. I didn't know, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I swear, Bruce, I didn't know. Don't lie to me. Bruce roared, his voice echoing through the apartment. You knew. Deep down you must have known. All those times I held her, loved her, thought she was my daughter, you knew there was a chance she wasn't. Sophia sobbed, shaking her head violently. I didn't. I thought she was yours. I wanted her to be yours. Wanted. Bruce repeated, his voice dripping with venom. That doesn't change the fact that she isn't. You let me believe she was Sophia. You let me raise her, love her, without ever telling me the truth. Sophia collapsed onto the couch, her sobs racking her body. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry, Bruce. I didn't want this to happen. Bruce stared at her, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. You didn't want this? He spat. You did this, Sophia. You destroyed our marriage, and now you've destroyed everything. Sophia looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. She's still your daughter in every way that matters, she said desperately. She loves you, Bruce. She needs you. Bruce's laugh was bitter, hollow. Don't you dare try to make this about Lily. You used me, Sophia. You used me to cover up your lies, to clean up your mess. She's innocent in all of this, Sophia pleaded, her voice breaking. Don't punish her for my mistakes. Bruce's eyes filled with tears, his anger giving way to the unbearable weight of heartbreak. I don't know if I can even look at her the same way, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Every time I see her, I'll think of you. Of him. Sophia reached out, but Bruce stepped back, his movements sharp and final. Get out, he said, his voice trembling. Take the kids and go. Bruce, she started, but he cut her off with a glare that stopped her cold. Go, he shouted, his voice cracking with the weight of his anguish. Sophia stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She gathered the children, her face a mask of devastation. As she left, Lily turned to wave at Bruce, her small hand clutching a stuffed animal he had bought her years ago. The sight of her innocent smile nearly broke him, but he couldn't bring himself to wave back. The days that followed were unbearable. Bruce couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He avoided calls from friends and family, unable to face their pity or their questions. His apartment felt like a prison, every corner a reminder of what he had lost. When he finally spoke to Josh, the conversation was as painful as he had feared. Why are you acting so weird around Lily? Josh asked, his young face full of confusion. Bruce hesitated, struggling to find the right words. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally. It's about your sister. Josh listened in stunned silence as Bruce explained, his young mind struggling to process the betrayal. But she's still my sister, right? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. Of course, Bruce said, his voice cracking. She'll always be your sister, Josh. That doesn't change. But she's not yours, Josh said, his words hitting Bruce like a punch to the gut. No, Bruce admitted, tears streaming down his face. She's not. Josh stared at him, his own tears welling up. Does this mean you don't love her anymore? Bruce broke down completely, pulling his son into a tight embrace. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. I don't know how to make sense of any of it. The months that followed were a haze of pain and soul-searching. Bruce tried to navigate his new reality, his relationship with Lily a minefield of conflicting emotions. She was innocent, as Sophia had said, but every time he looked at her, he saw the face of a man who had taken everything from him. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger and the heartbreak, there was love, a love that refused to be extinguished, no matter how deeply it had been buried. Sophia's life unraveled further than she could have imagined. The fallout from the DNA test wasn't just confined to her fractured family, it seeped into every corner of her existence. At work, where she had once been respected and valued, whispers began circulating. It started with sidelong glances from her colleagues in the break room. Whispers that hushed as she entered meetings. Sophia tried to ignore it, to put on a brave face, but the rumors about her affair with Will, her colleague, spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before her manager called her into his office, his expression grave. Sophia, he began, his voice clipped, I'm sure you've noticed the atmosphere in the office lately. This situation with Will, whatever it is affecting morale and productivity. Sophia's stomach dropped. It's personal, she said defensively. It has nothing to do with my work. Her manager sighed, rubbing his temples. In a perfect world, that would be true. But in this world, perception matters. Clients are hearing about it. The team is distracted. This isn't sustainable. She tried to argue, to plead her case, but the decision had already been made. By the end of the week, she was packing up her desk, the humiliation a crushing weight on her shoulders. Sophia's savings dwindled quickly as she struggled to support herself and the children on sporadic freelance work. The modest apartment she had rented after the divorce soon became a luxury she could no longer afford. With no other options, she swallowed her pride and called her parents. Her mother, ever judgmental, answered the phone. Sophia? It's been a while. To what do we owe the pleasure? I need to move back home, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission felt like a dagger to her pride. Her mother didn't mask her disdain. After everything? I told you not to marry Bruce, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've made a mess of your life. Sophia closed her eyes, her grip tightening on the phone. Please, Mom. I don't have anywhere else to go. Her parents reluctantly agreed, but the conditions were clear. She would pay rent once she found a new job, and she would contribute to household chores. Sophia moved back into her childhood bedroom, now stripped of its former charm, the walls bare and the furniture sparse. It was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. The humiliation didn't stop there. Sophia knew she needed help with the children, especially as she searched for steady work. Swallowing what little pride she had left, she called Bruce. Bruce, she began when he answered, his tone immediately cold. What do you want, Sophia? He interrupted, his voice sharp and devoid of warmth. She hesitated, hating herself for what she was about to ask. I need help with the kids. I can't manage everything on my own. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Bruce spoke, his voice even but laced with bitterness. I'll help with the kids, but that's it. Don't ask for anything else. Thank you, Sophia said, relief and shame washing over her in equal measure. Don't, Bruce cut her off. This isn't for you. It's for Josh and Lily. Sophia's parents' house was a stifling environment. Her mother's constant criticism and her father's passive-aggressive comments wore on her daily. She tried to stay out of their way, focusing on job applications and her children. But the tension in the house was palpable, and it only grew worse when Bruce came to pick up the kids. The first time he arrived, her mother opened the door with a forced smile. Bruce, it's been a while, she said, her eyes scanning him like he was an unwelcome guest. Mrs. Parker, Bruce replied curtly, stepping past her to find Josh and Lily. Sophia stood awkwardly in the hallway, her face flushing as Bruce avoided even glancing in her direction. When he emerged with the kids, she tried to thank him, but he brushed past her without a word, leaving her standing in the doorway, feeling small and invisible. Her mother, watching the exchange, sighed dramatically. "Well, you brought this on yourself, didn't you?" The children, too, began to sense the shift in their lives. Josh, now old enough to understand the tension, grew more withdrawn. Lily, blissfully unaware of the DNA test and its implications, often asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live together anymore. Each question was a dagger to Sophia's heart. One evening, as she tucked Lily into bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, do you still love Daddy?" Sophia froze, her throat tightening. "Of course I do," she whispered. "I always will." "Then why can't we all live together again?" Lily asked, her voice plaintive. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "Sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to," she said softly. "But Mommy and Daddy both love you very much." Bruce, true to his word, helped with the children but kept his distance from Sophia. He was polite but cold, his interactions with her limited to logistical matters. When Sophia tried to engage him in conversation, he shut her down with curt responses. At a school event for Josh, they found themselves sitting at the same table, surrounded by other parents. Bruce's phone buzzed, and he checked it, his expression softening as he smiled at the screen. Sophia caught a glimpse of a message from someone named Megan. "Who's Megan?" she asked quietly, unable to keep the jealousy from creeping into her voice. Bruce's expression hardened instantly. "None of your business," he said flatly, turning his attention back to the event. Sophia felt the familiar sting of rejection, the humiliation of being cast aside, not just by Bruce, but by the life they had once built together. She sat in silence for the rest of the evening, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. Weeks turned into months, and Sophia's job prospects remained bleak. Her savings were gone, her reputation tarnished, and her relationship with her parents was strained to the breaking point. She spent her nights lying awake in her childhood bed, replaying every mistake she had made, every decision that had led her here. Her once promising career was over. Her family was shattered. And the man she had betrayed, Bruce, the man who had once loved her unconditionally, now treated her as little more than a stranger. The weight of it all threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to keep going, if only for Josh and Lily. Sophia knew she had no one to blame but herself. And as she watched Bruce drive away with the kids each weekend, his back straight and his resolve unshaken, she realized she might never regain what she had lost.